Welcome back to Shadow Crime Stories. I'm your host, Roman.
And I'm Trish. We are so glad you could join us again for episode 4.
This week, we're stepping back in time to post-war Los Angeles to investigate one of the most infamous and frankly haunting unsolved cases in American history.
That's right, Roman. We're talking about the 1947 murder of Elizabeth Short, a case that has mystified investigators, authors, and the public for over 75 years.
But you probably know her by another name, the Black Dahlia.
Speaking of which, I tried to write a book about a famous cold case, but I couldn't finish it.
Oh yeah? Why not?
I just couldn't find the killer ending.
Right. Okay, moving on before we lose all our listeners.
To really understand this case, you have to transport yourself to the setting. This is Los Angeles in the late 1940s. The war is over and the city is booming.
Right. It's this beacon of hope. People are flooding into California from all over the country, chasing that glimmering Hollywood dream.
Exactly. On the surface, it's all glamour and opportunity. Movie studios are churning out films, there's money flowing, there's this incredible energy. But underneath all that sparkle, there was a really dark underbelly.
A dark side.
A huge one. The LAPD at the time was notoriously corrupt. There was organized crime, illegal gambling, and just a lot of people who were lost. They'd come to LA with big dreams and ended up broke, alone, and vulnerable.
It's a city of hope and broken dreams, all happening at the same time. The perfect backdrop for a tragedy.
That's the perfect way to put it. And into this dazzling, dangerous city walks a young woman named Elizabeth Short.
And she really embodied that hope, didn't she? Elizabeth Short was only 22 when she died. She was from Medford, Massachusetts, and had what you might call a difficult upbringing.
Yeah, from what I've read, her father abandoned the family during the Great Depression. He faked his own death, parked his car by a bridge, and just disappeared, leaving his wife to raise 5 daughters alone.
Wow, I didn't know that detail. So she grew up with that trauma. She also had severe asthma and respiratory issues, which led her to spending winters down in Florida to escape the cold Massachusetts air.
Right, and eventually she made her way to California to live with that same father who had resurfaced years later.
She was, by all accounts, a striking woman. Very beautiful, with pale skin and voluminous jet black hair that she often wore up with flowers tucked into it. She dreamed of being an actress.
It's the classic, almost cliché story for so many young women who flocked to LA then and still do now.
It really is, but the reality was far from glamorous. She drifted between low-wage jobs, mostly waitressing, and often relied on the kindness of friends, acquaintances, and men she was dating for a place to stay.
She lived a very transient lifestyle. And unfortunately, that made it incredibly difficult for police to retrace her final days and weeks when the time came.
And it's important to remember, amidst this chaotic picture, that she also experienced real love and heartbreak. She was reportedly engaged to a Major Matt Gordon Jr., an Air Force officer.
Tragically, he died in a plane crash just before he was due to return home and marry her. It's another layer of heartbreak in her already difficult life. This loss is what many believe prompted her to move to Hollywood, almost as if she was trying to outrun her grief by chasing a dream.
Exactly. The last time anyone saw her alive for certain was on January 9th, 1947 at the Biltmore Hotel in downtown Los Angeles. After that, she vanishes for about 6 days.
And this is where the story, which is already sad, takes a truly gruesome and horrifying turn. On the morning of January 15th, a woman named Betty Bersinger was walking with her 3-year-old daughter in the Lamert Park neighborhood. It was a residential area that was still under development.
Man, with her child, I can't even imagine what she was about to stumble upon.
She saw something pale and white in the grass of a vacant lot. Her first thought was that it was a discarded store mannequin that had broken in half.
Right, because who would ever think it could be a person?
But as she got closer, the horror set in. It wasn't a mannequin. It was the body of Elizabeth Short.
And the crime scene was just beyond belief. I mean, it's one of the most brutal things I've ever read about. Her body had been severed in half at the waist, with surgical precision. It was completely drained of blood and cleaned.
And posed. That's the part that is so deeply chilling. Her upper and lower halves were positioned about a foot apart. Her arms were raised over her head. This wasn't someone trying to hide a body. This was a display.
It was a statement, and the mutilations were horrific. Her face had been slashed from the corners of her mouth up towards her ears, creating a grotesque grin known as a Glasgow smile.
It was a level of brutality that shocked even the most hardened LA police officers. This was something different, something personal and sadistic.
As you can imagine, Trish, the press went absolutely insane with the story. It was a perfect storm for the sensationalist newspapers of the era.
A total media circus. They had a beautiful, young, aspiring actress, a horrifyingly gruesome crime, and the glamour of Hollywood as a backdrop. They were ruthless in their coverage.
I read that reporters from the Los Angeles Examiner actually called Elizabeth's mother in Massachusetts before the police did.
They did, and it was even worse than that. They tricked her. They told her that her daughter had won a beauty contest, and they needed details about her life for the story.
No, that's just evil.
It is. After getting all the personal information they could, they finally revealed that Elizabeth had been murdered. And then they flew her out to LA, supposedly to help with the police investigation, but really just to get exclusive access to her.
That's a level of journalistic malpractice that is hard to fathom. The reporters were as much a part of the chaos as the investigation itself. So where did the iconic nickname come from?
The Black Dahlia. It's so evocative. There's some debate, but the most common story is that it was coined by patrons and staff at a drugstore in Long Beach that she used to frequent.
And it was a reference to a movie, right?
Exactly. The film noir The Blue Dahlia, starring Veronica Lake and Alan Ladd, was a big hit at the time. With her jet black hair and penchant for black clothing, they nicknamed her the Black Dahlia. The press got a hold of it and it stuck.
Made her a legend. It almost mythologized her, turning a real person into a mysterious, tragic figure.
It really did. And in the middle of this media firestorm, the LAPD was trying to conduct a murder investigation. They threw everything they had at this case, but they were immediately and completely overwhelmed.
Right, because of the insane amount of publicity, they were just inundated with tips and false confessions.
Oh, so many. Over 60 people, mostly men, confessed to the murder. They were just disturbed individuals wanting their 15 minutes of fame, even for something this horrible. It bogged down the entire investigation.
And while all these false confessors were wasting police time, the real killer actually reached out, didn't they?
They did. About a week after the murder, on January 23rd, the editor at the Los Angeles Examiner received a package. Inside was Elizabeth Short's social security card, her birth certificate, some photographs, and an address book.
The package also contained a letter, right? Made from cut and pasted words from magazines and newspapers, like in a movie.
Yep, it read, "Here is Dahlia's belongings," and then, "Letter to follow." And crucially, the entire package had been carefully wiped clean with gasoline, destroying any possible fingerprints.
This killer was meticulous, intelligent, and was actively taunting the police and the press.
Completely. They sent a few more bizarre, rambling letters made of cut and pasted text. One of the last ones said, "Am changing my mind. You would not give me a square deal. Dahlia killing was justified."
Wow, that's a level of arrogance and confidence that is just staggering. To do something so monstrous and then claim it was justified. So, despite all this, the police never got close?
They investigated over 150 suspects over the years, but every lead just dissolved. The case went cold.
Okay, so let's get into the suspects because this is where the case becomes a universe of theories. There are dozens, but a few key names always surface to the surface. Trish, let's start with maybe the most famous one, George Hodel.
Yes, the brilliant but sinister doctor. This theory is so popular mainly because it was extensively researched and pushed by his own son, a former LAPD homicide detective named Steve Hodel.
His own son? That's just incredible. What was the evidence he presented?
Well, Steve argued that his father, a physician, had the surgical skill set to perform the hemicorporectomy, the bisection of the body. He also had a history of violence and abuse, including being a prime suspect in his own secretary's death.
And there was more, right? After his father's death, Steve found a photo album. In it were pictures of a woman he's convinced was Elizabeth Short.
That's right. And the most compelling part for me is that the LAPD actually had George Hodel under surveillance back in 1950. They bugged his house. And on the recordings, he's heard saying, "Supposing I did kill the Black Dahlia. They can't prove it now. They can't talk to my secretary anymore because she's dead."
That is bone-chilling. So why wasn't he arrested?
It's all circumstantial. It's a powerful narrative, but there's no smoking gun. No DNA, no murder weapon, just a lot of very creepy coincidences.
Okay, so besides Hodel, who else is high on the list?
Well, there was a man named Leslie Dillon. He was an aspiring writer and a former Morden's assistant. An informant pointed the police his way, and he knew some details about the crime that hadn't been made public. But his story kept changing, and they could never definitively link him to it.
Then there's the Cleveland torso murderer theory. For those who don't know, there was a serial killer active in Cleveland, Ohio in the 1930s who dismembered his victims. The MO is eerily similar: dismemberment, draining of blood.
It's a really compelling theory. Could it have been the same killer who then moved to LA? It's certainly possible, but again, no hard evidence to connect the two. Every single lead just dissolves into speculation.
Another prominent suspect, and one who was actually a person of interest to the original investigators, was a man named Walter Bailey. He was a surgeon, which immediately put him on the radar because of the precise bisection of the body. He also had a history of mental illness and a connection to the area where Elizabeth's body was found. So why, Trish, after all this time with no answers, are we still talking about the Black Dahlia? What is it about this specific case that makes it so enduringly fascinating?
I think it's that perfect storm we talked about earlier. You have the victim herself, this beautiful, tragic young woman who represents the dark side of that Hollywood dream. She's a symbol of lost innocence.
I agree. And then there's the sheer brutality and bizarre nature of the crime. The posing, the Glasgow smile, the taunting letters. It feels like something out of a horror novel, not real life.
Totally. It's so theatrical and strange. But I think the biggest reason is simply that it's unsolved. It leaves this giant gaping question mark in history. There's no resolution.
And that void allows for endless speculation. It's become a modern American myth. There are countless books, movies, and documentaries, all trying to answer the unanswerable.
It's a perfect, terrible mystery, a story with no ending.
And it's not just true crime fanatics who keep the story alive. The Black Dahlia case has had a huge cultural footprint. It's inspired novels, most famously James Ellroy's The Black Dahlia, which is a masterpiece of crime fiction. It's also been adapted into films and TV shows.
Each adaptation, whether it's a gritty noir film or a network TV procedural, introduces the story to a new generation. It becomes a kind of dark folklore, a cautionary tale about the perils of fame and the darkness that can hide behind a glamorous facade.
And at the end of the day, it's so important to remember that behind the legend, behind the creepy nickname and the sensational headlines, was a real person. Elizabeth Short was a 22-year-old woman with hopes and dreams, and her life was stolen in the most horrific way imaginable.
And her killer got away with it. They lived out their life and likely died of old age without ever facing justice. And for me, Roman, that's the most chilling part of all.
And that's all the time we have for this episode of Shadow Crime Stories. It's a heavy one, for sure.
It really is. Thank you all so much for listening. We will be back in 2 weeks with another deep dive into a case that lurks in the shadows.
You can find us on all major podcast platforms, and please consider leaving a review if you enjoy the show. Until next time, stay vigilant.
Bye, everyone.